So a few years back, Gene Binder, Brian Carlucci, and I are in Israel, or in Jerusalem, more specifically the city of David, and we've signed up for the tour of King Hezekiah's tunnel. Anybody taking that tour in here? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, so you guys know what I'm talking about. For those of you who have no idea about King Hezekiah's tunnel, let me give you a little history. So Hezekiah's tunnel is a 1,750-foot water channel that was carved out of bedrock beneath the city of David during the late 8th and early 7th century BC. Okay, so according to 2 Kings 20:20, you guys can read about this, and 2 Chronicles 32, it was created to protect Jerusalem's water source from the Assyrian army who were on their way to attack the city. And it's truly this miraculous feat, because what happened was they essentially dug from both ends of this tunnel. Okay, again, 1,750 feet long. They dug from both ends, and they're able to meet each other in the middle. So it's a crazy miracle. And not just that, the water was able to flow back into the city of David, where it was protected behind the city wall. So it really was miraculous. I think it's like a 6% grade or something. It was like perfect. And so Gene, he signs us up for the trek through Hezekiah's tunnel, but fails to tell us that it's 1,750 feet long. And Brian Carlucci fails to tell us that he's claustrophobic, okay? So I don't know if you guys can put two and two together, but this, because of their lack of communication, it's going to go down as one of my all-time favorite memories, all right? So we begin Hezekiah's tunnel trek, and the first thing that I notice is there's water in the tunnel. Like, to this day, that spring still flows. And so we get into knee-deep water. And I'm like, this is sketchy. This sounds like a bad idea. And so I look to our tour guide, who's like this tall, this young lady, and I'm like, hey, is this safe? Like, should we be going in here? Does the water rise up high enough that we could drown? She's like, not during this season. We'll be fine. I was like, okay, I'm going to trust you on that. So we start into the trek, and that's when I noticed the second thing, which is the beginning of this tunnel is 5 feet tall and like 2 feet wide. Here's a picture to show you guys what it looks like. It's tight. And so she's able to kind of walk in, but me and Brian are having to duck so we don't hit our head, and our shoulders are literally scraping against the side of this tunnel. And so this is how it works, all right? She's first, I'm second, Brian Carlucci is third. There's a couple from Spain that's behind Brian, and then Gene Binder's all the way in the back, taking up the back, all right? So we start this trek, and she's singing like something out of Lord of the Rings, like a Lothlorien Elvish song, like no joke. She's just singing away, which is great because it's kind of calming me down a little bit. And at some point, like 5 minutes into it, I realized, like, this is a long tunnel. Like, this is going on for forever. And I start to think, I wonder how long it took them to actually dig the tunnel. So I interrupt her singing, and I'm like, excuse me, ma'am, like, how long did it take them to do this? And she says, no one knows. There's estimates, but no one really knows for sure. And that's when I hear Brian Carlucci from the back, and he says, Gabe, what did she say? What did she say? And I turn around and I look, and I'm the only one with the headlamp on, so my headlamp hits his face, and he's a little bit cross-eyed like this. And he's white, and I could tell something is not wrong. Something's wrong. And I'm like, hey, dude, I hold on. I have no idea what you're talking about. I just asked her, like, how long it took them to dig this tunnel. He's like, how long are we going to be in this tunnel? How long? I was like, I don't know. I didn't ask her that. He's like, find out. And so I turn around and look. I'm like, man, I interrupt this lady singing again. I'm like, man, how long are we planning on being in this tunnel? And she says, well, it depends on who's in front of us. It could take like up to 45 minutes. And Brian loses his mind. Gabe, I have to get in front of you. Move. I have to get in front. I can't see. I got to get in. So he's trying to I'm like, you can't go anywhere. It's 5 feet, 2 feet. I can't get out of the way. And he's like, I'm going to bash my head up against the wall, put me on my back, and float me out of here. No joke, he says that. I'm like, dude, you're not going to bash your head. Like, hold on. And so we go a little bit further, and they had started to, like, tunnel in one direction and realized, no, we need to stay on this path. And so I'm able to put my backpack and half of my torso into this little cutout, and Brian just shimmies by me. He's like, this is horrible. Is that a good Brian impersonation, though? That's what he did. He's able to calm down. As soon as he could see past the guide's head, like over her head with the light, he was able to calm down. We were able to get to the end of the tunnel. Now, here's the point to telling this story. besides getting to make fun of Brian, which I love to do. Okay, it's reality. Had I known the nature of that tunnel, had I understand the nature, the reality of that tunnel, and the reality of Brian's claustrophobia, we would have navigated that situation totally different. We would have avoided it altogether. I would have been like, bro, this is a bad idea for a person who's claustrophobic. Like, we're not going down there. Understanding both of those realities, both Brian's reality and the tunnel's reality, would have changed our decisions. It would have helped us navigate life in a wise way. And this is precisely what Jonah chapter 1 is about. That there are two realities, not just about Jonah, but about all of us, every single one of you guys in this room. There's two realities about all of us that we have to know in order to navigate life well. That we need to know in order to flourish in this life. And so let's start off by reading chapter 1 together in hopes to discover both of these realities. Verse 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone down below, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, how can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish. Then the sailors said to each other, come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity. They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? He answered, I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. This terrified them, and they asked, what have you done? They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, what should we do to make the sea calm down for us? Pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will be calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, Lord, have done as you pleased. Then they took Jonah, threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered him a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. And last but not least, now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So verse 1, it says this, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. Reality number 1 that we all need to know about us, about humanity, although we are made by God, we were made by God and we are made for God, there's a tendency in all of humanity to run from God, to go the exact opposite, to do the exact thing of what he says, right? If you look at history, if you look at our lives, you'll find that we often pursue life by running away from the author of life, which seems weird, but it's true. That we run from the very thing that protects us. That we run from the very person that we're designed to stay close to. And this dates back to the beginning with Adam and Eve when God says, hey, stay away from this certain tree and this certain fruit. And what do? They get on a boat to Tarshish and they go the opposite direction. Literally running from what God said, hiding from him. They do the exact opposite. And here's the thing, we know this to be inherently true about humans. Parents of toddlers, you guys know every single time you sit down at the dinner table and they get their sippy cup out and you're like, hey, can you please not throw the sippy cup on the ground? What do? They're like, and they like smile and you're like, hey, please don't throw. And then food goes off, right? We're like, hey, don't throw the sippy cup. They throw the sippy cup. Why do we have to, put in things like outlet covers. Somebody figured out a long time ago, it doesn't matter how many times you tell a kid, like, hey, don't shove things into outlets. They do it anyways, right? The crawling phase can be scary, but then what happens? They start to run. And then you're like, hey, your head is ginormous. Do not run downhill full speed, right? Because what happens? Your head gets in front of you and you like slide across the cement and you have, major owies, right? Like, do not run full speed. Or watch out for the street. What do? They run right towards the street, and parents like run, like trying to grab their arm, like, no, stay away from the road. And you would say, well, maybe it's just because they're so young and so it's understanding, they don't know better. But the truth is, as kids get older, nothing changes. Here's a picture of Gabby and our puppy Obi. Cutest thing of all time, right? You see how she's squeezing that dog like really, really hard? So we're trying our best to teach Gabby that dogs are not like stuffed animals, okay? Because she was yanking on their ears and she dropped him on his head multiple times. And she would squeeze them really hard, like, hey, just so you know, inside of puppies, okay, it's not stuffing. Like, there's, like, vital organs inside of them, so you can't squeeze super hard. And I'll never forget the day I come downstairs, and I'm walking downstairs, and there she is sitting on the timeout chair. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she says, I'm on timeout. And I'm like, who put you on timeout? She's like, I did. And I was like, why? She says, I bit the dog. I was like, yeah, that's good. Sit on timeout for a little bit. Good job. Proud of you. We have this tendency from the day we are born to not listen to those that are there to help us thrive, right? We have this tendency to run from the very people that are there to protect us, the very people that gave us life. We have this tendency to do the exact opposite of what our parents say. And again, it's cute when our kids are little, but then they become teenagers. And for those of us who have teenagers, know at some point it's not very cute. And all jokes aside, as a dad of teenagers and as a youth pastor who works with teenagers, we know how scary it can be when those kids that we desperately love get on a boat and they run away from everything that we've taught them. It's scary. I've often heard college students say things like this. Look, I know God wants me to live differently, but I just want to have fun first, right? I want to live it up. I want to live for myself and have fun. One day I'll come back to God, right? One day I'll put myself in his shackles, but right now I just want to have fun. I want to live it up. And that is a fleeing statement with a fleeing assumption that real life isn't found with God. It's found somewhere else, right? And one day you'll put yourself in those shackles and have a suck life, but for now I just want to enjoy it. That's a fleeing statement to Tarshish. See, here's the truth. It's not some children. It's not some students. It's all of us. And this is why I love the story, because it's even prophets of God. Even prophets of God flee from him. And the pastors that I trust the most understand that to be true about themselves. That they say, look, I am just as capable of doing some wretched things as anybody else, which is why I have to stay close. I got to remain close to Jesus. Reality one, for us to know about ourselves in order to flourish in this life, is that although we are made by God and we are made for God, there is a tendency in all of humanity to run from him, to do the exact opposite of what he says. That there's something in all of humanity that tries to find life apart from the creator of life. We do. And again, this is where we find Jonah. Jonah knows God. He loves God, right? He's been given a very special word for the people of Nineveh on behalf of God. He's one of God's representatives, and yet he flees from him. Why? Because of Nineveh. Now, Nineveh would have been a big ask for Jonah, right? And here's why. It's because Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, the same Assyria that came to destroy Israel during the reign of King Hezekiah, which is why we have Hezekiah's tunnel. Assyria was a nation that neighbored Israel, and Israel was always worried that at some point it was going to rise up and it was going to come destroy them. Nineveh would have been a super scary place for a Jew to be in. And so for God to say, hey, go to Assyria and preach to them, you can imagine why this was a difficult ask for him. Which I want to stop there and point out, sometimes God asks us to do really difficult and scary things. If you think that a life with Jesus is simply about, a hot cup of coffee in your quiet place, that's not true. Sometimes he asks us to do very difficult things and asks us to go to very scary places. A few years back, I saw a buddy of mine, Dan Palmer. He posted this video of him in Uganda, and they were dedicating this well, and it was this amazing, amazing celebration. And at the end of the video, he says, hey, who wants to come back with me to dig some more wells? And so at the time, I was trying to figure out what we're going to do for the high school kids for our mission trip. So I got on the phone, and I was like, hey, Dan, is this something I could bring high school kids to? And he's like, no. It's not safe, but you should come. And he goes on to tell me about Pastor David Balbakuba, and many of us know his story at this point because we've been, committed to him and his community for the past few years. But Pastor David Balbakuba, his story is he grew up in an all-Muslim village, in a Muslim family. And Jesus comes to him 3 times in a dream, and he ends up giving his life to Jesus. And because of that, his family and his community threatens to kill him. And so he has to flee. He takes off and goes to live in Kampala. And then at some point, God says, David, you got to go back home. You got to go preach to him. You got to go tell him about Jesus. And he does. And he goes back, and all these amazing things were taking place. And so Dan says, hey, look, I want you to come with me. And if I'm 100% honest with you, the fact that there was some animosity towards Pastor David for preaching about Jesus, I was like, heck no. In my heart, right, I bought a ticket to Tarshish. I was like, no way, I'm not going there. And yet God said, hey, I desperately want you to go. I'm calling you to go. And it was later on I had a conversation with Dan, and he's like, look, don't miss out on the miracles that are happening here. Don't miss out on the opportunity of being a part of this, right? Literally, David is a modern-day Jonah. The miracles that are taking place here are so cool. And so we ended up going, me and a few buddies. And what's taken place because of our connection with Pastor David is miraculous. What God has done through his life is miraculous. Had David not gone back to his village, I can't imagine. I can't imagine missing out on the joy of getting to be a part of that story that's taken place in Uganda in this small village. It is incredible. This church alone has purchased like 14 or 15 freshwater wells for different villages in the community. The children's ministry has raised the funds for 2 buildings within his school, right? The high school ministry has raised the funds to build the first church in this village. Over 100 people from Cornerstone have gone to Uganda to witness this and see this. We have a family this summer that's going to live there for a year. I want you guys to know this has nothing to do with Gabe Kinzley. Again, if it was up to me, God would have said, hey, Gabe, go to Uganda. And I would have went and bought a ticket to Cancun for an all-inclusive resort. That's just the truth. Sometimes he asks us to do scary things, but it leads to amazing blessings. And Jonah will have the blessing of being a part of one of humanity's greatest revivals of all time. But first, he's got to run. Look at this map. God says go to Nineveh, and he literally goes the opposite direction. Like it's not more opposite. Like that, he goes the complete opposite direction. Right? And it's because of his decision to run from God, Jonah learns humanity's next reality, which is this: that although we have a tendency to run from God, we have a God that comes after us. We have a heavenly Father that loves us and pursues us, and he comes after us. And that is the story of humanity that we all have fled and ran away from real life, every single one of us. And God in his grace and love pursues us. But let me tell you something that I've learned about the way that God comes after us. Oftentimes, it's in the form of storms. In the form of storms. In the most dire circumstances, sometimes God will allow us to go through hardships and fear and pain to rid us of our stubbornness. And what I've seen is storms oftentimes look like 2 different things. The first one is this: he won't give you what you want. He literally stops you in your tracks, right? You never actually make it to Tarshish. He exposes you. He brings your sin to light. I'll never forget a high school boy coming to my office after he just got caught looking at pornography by his parents. And he was broken. He was struggling with shame. He was super mad at his parents for going through his stuff. Had they not, I wouldn't have been caught. He was in the belly of the fish, per se, right? He was sitting in the mire. And I'll never forget looking at him and having this realization of like, dude, this actually might be the greatest. I know you're angry. I know this is difficult. I know there's shame. This might be one of the best things that could have ever happened to you. That God stopped you in your tracks. Because the truth is, you stay on that boat of sexual addiction or pornography, it gets really dark and really scary. Sometimes he allows us to get caught. He brings us a storm that literally forces us to surrender, to stop running. And guys, we have to understand why. It's because he desperately loves us. Secondly, sometimes he gives us precisely what we are asking for, which I would argue can be worse off, way more scary. He lets us sail all the way to Tarshish, and we get there, and it completely lets us down. Kind of like the story of the prodigal son, right? Where God says, hey, I love you. I love you so much, I'm going to let you go. And I'm going to let you go because I'm praying that wherever you end up, you'll find out that it's not all that it's cracked up to be, and you'll come home to me. That I love you. When my middle son Ethan was little, he was a wanderer. So there's multiple occasions where he just disappeared. We were at Wanaka Lake one time, just disappeared. We're freaking out. We have all these parents around scrambling to try to find him. And like 5 minutes later, he pops out of a bush. It's like, ha, I tricked you. We're like, no, don't do that. Another time we're at the Orchard Mall. Same thing. We just got sandwiches, and we're playing in the little playground area, and he just disappears. He decides to go get napkins on his own. He's like 3 years old. And we're, same thing, parents all over the place, running in and out of all the stores in the vicinity looking for this little towhead kid. He's nowhere to be found. 5 minutes goes by. We're like, yeah, he was taken. I mean, we're freaking out, about to call the police. All of a sudden, this guy comes around the corner holding his hand. He was like, hey, whose kid is this? He needed some napkins. Well, I'll never forget being at a movie. And the movie ends, and we kind of stay for the credits because there's like good things that, after the movie's over. We stand up to leave, and I was like, Ethan, it's time to go. So our whole family starts walking out, and what does Ethan do? He starts climbing over all of the different rows, and he's like eating popcorn and candy off the ground, random stuff. And so I was about to go grab him, and I was like, wait, I'm just going to stay. I'm going to stand here. I'm going to stand here so he can't see me, but I can see him. And a minute goes by. He's playing. 2 minutes goes by. 3 minutes. 5 minutes goes by, and all of a sudden, he looks up, and he realizes nobody is here. I am in this giant auditorium all by myself. Nobody's here. It's dark. It's scary. And he begins to cry, and he runs as fast as he can for the door. And that's when I step over, and he sees me. And I get down on my knees, and I look him in the eyes and say, hey, bud, stay close to me. That's where your protection is. Stay with me. Was I in control as his dad? Yeah. Was I always there? I was, right? When Ethan got what he wanted and he looked up and it was dark and it was lonely and not all that he thought it was cracked up to be, it scared him. And he came running back to me, and I was able to remind him, I'm your dad who loves you. Stay close to me. Some of you guys here today maybe find yourself in a place where you sailed away from God a long time ago. If you're honest, you're like, yeah, I don't know about this whole God thing. I'm going to go chase after this relationship, or I'm going to chase after this career, this lifestyle to fill me up, and you let God go. And God let you go. And you got it, and it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. Matter of fact, if you're honest, it completely let you down. And so maybe you're here this morning because you're like, God, I want to give you a second chance. Let me remind you, God has always been there. And he always will. Both of those can feel like storms. Either I've been caught and I've been forced to stop running, or I finally got what I wanted. And not only was it not enough, it left me more empty than before. Both examples feel like dark clouds of hopelessness and loneliness. Both feel like storms. And so God sometimes will send those storms into our life to get us to wake up. And that is exactly where Jonah is. Because he's down in the hull of the boat. As many commentators will point out, they believe he's depressed. He's found himself in this really dark place, and he's curled up in the bottom of the boat, and he's fallen asleep. He's run from God, which led him to a very dark, scary place. And what does he do? He finally wakes up. AKA, he acknowledges, yeah, I've messed up. And I love how Jonah says it, right? The guys on the boat are like, hey, what is going on? What have you done? And Jonah, in as honest of an answer possible, he says, yeah, so the God that created the sea, I tried to run from him in a boat. It's a bad idea. And I could only imagine his non-believer friends, the response like, wait, why would you do that? And he's like, yeah, it doesn't make sense at all. And Jonah, in his humility, says, I'm done. I'm done running. Throw me overboard. And this is the changing moment in Jonah's life. But it's also the changing moment in our lives as well. What does Jonah do to stop running? The same thing that we all have to do. First and foremost, he admits he's been running. Maybe the best thing you could do today is to acknowledge how right now, today, you're running from God. For some of us, it's Jonah's problem, which is self-righteousness, right? Especially in today's political climate, there's a spirit of superiority over others. That we actually despise people that God would call his people. We subconsciously or consciously are cheering for other people's demise. Where God would say, hey, I want you to move toward those people. We're like, heck no, I'm getting on the boat. I'm going the opposite direction. I can't be around them. For some of us, it's envy. Envy of others mixed with self-hatred. We're constantly looking around and comparing our looks, our homes, our kids' success. Living life is a constant reminder of what we're not. Every day is a reminder of how we're not pretty enough, how we're not smart enough, athletic enough, wealthy enough, right? We know God wants us to go to him to get our worth, and yet we get on the boat and go the opposite direction. And because of that, we're stuck in this pattern of feeling like crap about ourselves, of envying others, wishing we were somebody else. For some of us, it's performance. We want to be envied. We think that real life will be found in status, and so we say things or do things that maybe we normally wouldn't say or do to get that status, oftentimes at the expense of hurting people. Or I see this all the time, at the expense of spinning our wheels, right, at such a fast pace that we feel like we're on the verge of an anxiety attack. Where God is saying, hey, I'm calling you to go this way. I'm calling you to have a Shabbat, a Sabbath, slow down. We say, no, we can't, because I'm chasing after something that's more important. We run away and literally run ourselves into the ground. For some of us, like we talked about, it's lust. If we're honest, we know in our hearts that God has created sex a certain way. That it's an incredible gift. But we fall prey to the idea that there's something better on Tarshish, right? That really I'm going to sleep with as many people as I possibly can, or we believe, that, no, I made it to Tarshish, which really means pornography. I'm never going to get off this island. It's just not possible. Can't happen for me. And because of it, we found ourselves in some dark places. For some of us, it's living for the simple pleasures of life as opposed to stepping out to what's uncomfortable. That God's saying, no, I'm calling you to go to this direction. Maybe go seek a counselor for some of the things that you haven't dealt with in life. And you're like, no, I'm going to choose what's comfortable. Like, that's too much to do that. Or I'm calling you to get involved in a life group. You're like, no, it's too uncomfortable. I'm going to go the opposite direction. Some of us, it's bitterness. We hear God's call to forgive those that have hurt us, maybe even forgive ourselves, and yet we run the opposite direction, and we choose to remain bitter. When God's telling us to go towards forgiveness, we choose the opposite. Maybe the best thing you could do today is to acknowledge how you're running from God, and here's why. If you don't acknowledge it, as Tim Keller puts so well, I love what he says. He says, there will always be a boat to Tarshish. There'll always be a person to envy. At school or work, friends, family, right? There's always a million people to look to and like, I'm not as good as you. There'll always be another political opponent to hate or people group to treat as inferior to you. There will always be another person to have sex with or another video to watch. There'll always be another person that hurts you that you can remind every day of how they failed you and how miserable you are because of their failure. There will always be a road, or rather a boat, to Tarshish. Secondly, Jonah stops running by proclaiming who he is, and I love this. If you notice the crew on the boat, they say, "Who are you? Who is your God?" And Jonah could have kept running in his response, but he doesn't. He says, "I'm a Hebrew," meaning this is who I am. My God is the God that saves his people and rescues them over and over and over again. He is the God that parted the Red Sea so that we could escape from our adversaries, and yet here I am, ironically, running from God on the sea. The second thing he does is he gets honest with who he is. Some of you guys simply need to remember and acknowledge who you are, that you're a follower of Jesus and that matters to you. That you're a follower of Yeshua, that matters to you, that's who you are. Some of you guys just need to return to that truth that I love God. That's my identity. Thirdly, Jonah says this, "Throw me overboard." He stops running by saying, "I'm done running. Throw me overboard. Let me help you. I've caused this problem for you and for myself. I'm to blame. I'm sorry. This is my fault." For some of you, the best thing you can do today to stop running is to stop only caring about yourself. To start caring about your spouse more than yourself. Maybe your kids more than yourself. To start putting them first. To acknowledge, man, I've caused some pain in our family. It's me. I'm gonna throw myself overboard for you. I've seen marriages change by spouses saying these two things, like, we are followers of Jesus. Let's let him in. Let's get together and let's pray. Me and you together right now. Jesus, come into this marriage. And then secondly, let's stop just thinking about ourselves. Let's start putting the other person first. Which really speaks to the last thing Jonah does. He puts himself in a position of desperation, which was a choice, right? They didn't want to throw him overboard. They tried everything in their power, like, we don't want to throw this dude overboard. Jonah's like, no, you got to. I have to go overboard. Jonah took a posture of, I cannot survive without you, God. I'm going to drown without your help. God, if I live today, it is because of you and you alone. And that's when God says, awesome, let me go to work. Hey, fish, it's time, which is fascinating to me, right? Because God could have saved Jonah in a billion ways, but he wants him to sit in the nastiness, the grime, the disgusting belly of a fish. And there is something very difficult about looking at our failures. That's the truth. It's hard. About being honest with our mistakes, how we've let people down. It's painful, but understanding our depravity is the key to understanding God's amazing love and grace. And it's in this place of acknowledging our failure that God, his love looks so good. In closing, I love how Jesus compares himself to Jonah in Matthew 12:40 when he says this, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Meaning Jonah was buried in the fish for 3 days and lived. Jesus was buried in the ground and died. Because we have a God that pursues us, that comes after us, that loves us. Will you close your eyes with me for a second? How are you running from God? We all do, right? It's our nature. Welcome to the company of the prophets. It's all of us. How are you running from God? Father, I pray for every person in this room, and I know that there's some here that can identify with this. The truth that they have been running from you for a long time, or maybe even just recently. And I praise you, God, for the reality that you love them. You pursue us. You're a God that comes after us, that your grace and mercy is what makes us new. I pray that this morning they would return to you. If that's where they're at, they would return to you. They would look to you. Father, I thank you that as difficult as it is in moments of failure, when we let people down, we let even ourselves down, praise you, God, you meet us in that place. You remind us of who we are, that we are yours, that we belong to you. That you do everything and have done everything in your power that we could be infinitely protected and close to you. I praise you, God, for who you are to us. And we love you. It's in Jesus' name.